We all know Trey McBride is the tight end one in this class, but is there any other tight ends worth looking to draft in Dynasty? That and more today on the Dynasty Newsletter. I'm your host, Adam Wilde, joined by my co-host, Chris Allen. Chris, let's just start with Trey McBride, man. What do you got on Trey McBride?
Tight end one in the class, a solid receiver, route runner. A decent blocker too. I know we were talking pre-show
Right.
about what level of blocker, and I know that we in the fantasy community, especially when it comes to tight ends, you always try and comp or pigeonhole a tight end prospect to a player that's currently in the field. And it's not as easy with other positions. Maybe running back might be an easy way, like an easier position, but with wide receivers are so diverse, trying to say that like Drake London is like Cooper Kupp because of the route running skills, blah, 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 that's difficult. But to say, I know you would say that Trey McBride is more like, let's say, George Kittle as a blocker.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more along the lines of, let's say, maybe like a Jordan Reed-esque, like from a blocking standpoint. Just like if you don't have to, he doesn't have to do it, that'd be great, and just focus on.
Willing.
Yes, I think that's more that sort of thing. Where if you focus on the fantasy upside of him, which is in Dynasty, that's what we do. I mean, that would be a better shot, or at least a better way to look at like his skill set, at least on that facet of his game. But if he's still if he's still the guy or the tight end one in this class, I think really it just comes down to draft capital, which I'm sure we'll get into here shortly, is the biggest piece when evaluating tight ends, like from a fantasy or just ultimately a dynasty perspective.
Yeah, he's far and away the tight end one, and I think part of that is just being the most well-rounded. I mean, he's the most respectable blocker in the class, to be sure. But I guess the big point that we're going to have to make throughout talking about actually we're going to talk about three prospects today is just there's kind of like three different kinds of tight ends, right? And they all kind of matter for fantasy in a different way. So like your Trey McBrides are important because while blocking doesn't necessarily matter, and one could even argue that blocking would actually be a reason to maybe dislike a player a little bit more because they're going to be kept in to block a little more often. See Jonnu Smith, for example, this past season with the Patriots. He was very involved in their offense. They really liked him, but it didn't result in any fantasy numbers. Not anything near what we thought we would see in Tennessee, and then certainly not with the Patriots. And that's just because he was very willing blocker, very good blocker, and he also performed that kind of H-back role. So blocking can be detrimental, but it also keeps you on the field. So like you've got your TJ Hawkinson 100% snap rates or whatever, and then you've got your Mark Andrews 50% snap share. Mark Andrews was under 50% snap share, I believe, for his first two seasons when he was playing with Hayden Hurst along with Nick Boyle, who was like a true blocking tight end. As a matter of fact, Nick Boyle is probably the best blocking tight end in the NFL. So Mark Andrews was very productive on the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's like he couldn't block well enough to stay on the field over 50% of the snaps, but he was so productive. So we kind of have three of those guys today because we're going to talk about Trey McBride, then we're going to talk about Dulcich, and then I wanted to bring Likely in as kind of a sleeper, and you've got it all covered there. Where like Dulcich is your kind of middle of the road, like he can block if you need him to, and then it's like Likely don't even think about asking him to block, but he's going to get you 20 yards a catch or whatever. So when you look at McBride, he has the best chance at being like a significant part of an offense in the running and passing game. So that's why he's everyone's consensus tight end one. Now he's being talked about being drafted somewhere in the mid-second round, which is about where we saw like Patrick Freiermuth was a big point of contention we had before the show, because it was like, how valuable is Pat Freiermuth now in Dynasty as opposed to what he was? So that's kind of where you can bring into the conversation. Like you've got Trey McBride, Greg Dulcich, and actually in these mocks, you actually have Isaiah Likely as third too. But when you talk about these three guys, it's like their value now is so minute. Do you think that it can grow? Like maybe speak specifically on Dulcich. Do you think that a guy that's being drafted in like the third or fourth round, can his value grow enough in Dynasty to make it really worth it?
Well, not impossible. And just for clarification, so that's from the public and free website, Grinding the Mocks. They wind up taking they aggregate a lot of the information around there. And just to like give folks like a decent idea of like how to quickly use it, go through, and I just went through, just looked at like from the tight ends, like who are the guys that are going to be drafted if my internet actually wants to like cooperate with me. But either way, the point of this is that where are we going to expect some of these guys to be drafted? Like, what's the draft capital going to be associated with them? Because as of right now, as you saw from earlier, at best, Trey McBride going as the first like tight end off the board is going to be around like 56 overall, which is the back end of the second round. And then after that, I mean, you don't see another tight end expected to be drafted until 80th overall. So now you're talking about towards the back end of day 2. And so that's where you wind up having, at least there's some issue there regarding draft capital, because from a historical standpoint, and I'm going to quiz you real quick, Adam, and for the folks at home listening as well, I mean, first round rookie tight ends, I mean, the ones that like we've all been hyped to draft, like whether it's Kyle Pitts or even like Evan Ingram or even like TJ Hawkinson, Noah Fant, like those guys that we knew coming out, the athleticism was there, the college production was there, and the possibility from them being instant fantasy contributors was there as well. Those are the guys that we wanted to draft. But as you saw earlier, we don't have any of those guys. But out of the first round rookie tight ends that have been drafted, 2 of them have been hits like right out of the gate, so top 12, and so that's Kyle Pitts and Evan Ingram. At least 5 of them have finished in the rookie season as top 24 like tight ends, so that's good. I mean, they're instant fantasy impacts. But the day 2, day 3 guys, which is essentially the rounds that we're expecting most of these guys to get drafted. Adam, I'll ask you this: 20 have been drafted, so 20 day 2 picks have gone towards tight ends over the past 5 years. Guess how many have finished in the top 12 their rookie season?
Do I pretend you didn't already tell me that it's 0?
I know, just play for the folks at home.
50.
Well, I said 20, so how could 50 have finished like in the top? Come on now.
All right, 49.
Oh my gosh. 0, folks. 0 have actually finished in the top 12. All right, so that might be too much or too high of a filter. What about top 24? So think about top 24 tight ends, like what it takes in order to finish inside the top 24 at tight end. I mean,
I might have been a top 24 tight end last year.
Exactly. You just got to fall in the end zone a few times, and then you can pretty much finish as a top 24 tight end. How many day 2 rookie tight ends have actually finished in the top 24 their first year? Out of the 20 that
4.
I said earlier, 3. Freiermuth, Dallas Goedert, and Mark Andrews. So it's like, so this is the range.
That was, I mean, talk about running hot with the Ravens. How do you take Hayden Hurst in the first round, but then you still stumble upon Lamar Jackson and then Mark Andrews in the third, who was actually the much better tight end than the one you took in the first?
Isn't that kind of wild though? Because didn't a similar team that also resides fairly close to Baltimore wind up doing the same thing with quarterbacks like a few years like prior to that with Kirk Cousins and then RG3? It was just like, hey, we're going to draft this. We're going to draft
a first and a fourth because they didn't have a backup either.
Yeah.
And then
so it's like we're going to draft this quarterback and then we're going to take another one later. It's like we're going to take this tight end and then we're going to take another one later. And just in the chance that we might have messed up because we drafted an older tight end prospect who didn't really do as well.
The yips.
As he had hoped. But either way, but my point in bringing all of this up and the hit rates associated with draft capital is that we do need to kind of, bound our expectations for what we're expecting for some of these guys. And if you're coming in wanting to draft Trey McBride or Greg Dulcich or Isaiah Likely or any one of these guys coming out of this class, what are your expectations for them? Are you expecting Kyle Pitts returns, or are you looking for more of a Dawson Knox of this class or Dalton Schultz that you might just either let him sit on your taxi squad, back into your bench for a couple of years? You only spend at best a late 3rd, 4th round pick on them, hoping that they develop in 2 to 3 years. Because if those are your expectations, then okay, cool. I mean, no argument there. But it's just looking at the hit rate associated with draft capital, the expected draft capital of this class. I mean, we're talking 56 is the earliest. And then right after that, we're not talking until at best like the 3rd round. Then it should at least behoove us as dynasty owners to at least try to figure out, all right, well, how should I adjust my expectations? And also do those expectations meet the needs for my team? And if not, then look elsewhere instead of drafting a tight end this year.
Sure. So the focus of the conversation has to really be around your expectations and what are you looking for in a tight end. So um, I guess I've put the carriage before the horse a little bit by getting into the other prospects first. So we're going to have to jump into Greg Dulcich really quickly and just discuss for a second, like what are our expectations for him. So I think he's a willing blocker. He's a little slight of frame.
Mhm.
He's fast, but how much do I care about the fact that he's fast at tight end really in the NFL? And of course, he's a solid receiver, which a lot of the tight ends coming out of college now are going to be solid receivers. Just the nature of the game now, the nature of the NFL. These guys that are getting drafted with significant draft capital, let's say for a tight end, maybe fourth round and earlier, probably going to be fairly decent receivers. We saw Drew Sample. That was a really weird pick by your Bengals. I don't know that
Yeah.
that's really panned out, but he's the only guy off the top of my head that I can think of that's gone in like the top 4 rounds in the last few years that wasn't considered to be a productive pass catcher. So Greg Dulcich is the consensus tight end two amongst a lot of the fantasy industry, and he's probably going to end up being in Superflex a late third, probably.
Mhm.
One QB, maybe a mid third. So, you're talking about your tight end two isn't even going to be in consideration until the mid to late third round, depending on what format you're playing in. And to me, that just says, why don't I take the time that I was going to take worrying about tight end and just like think about other positions that I can target that actually have a okay or better than 0% chance of hitting at that point in the draft. Like, if we're going to have this conversation, why are we ever taking shots on tight ends? And if we are taking shots on tight end, then we'll take shots on the guy that we talk about here in a second. But do you have anything else on Greg Dulcich?
No, I think you kind of laid out the case for Dulcich. I mean, solid as a receiver, and then kind of going through our own Matt Waldman's rookie scouting portfolio and seeing some of the comps to him. I'll go ahead and lay one out for you, right? A couple out here. I mean, he's got him on the Dawson Knox, Irv Smith, like Chris Herndon, so somewhere in there. So I think that from a receiving standpoint, which is what we care about from a fantasy angle, I mean, those are the types of guys I would like to hear when compared to a guy or at least any prospect at the tight end position. So I do think that, and now it just kind of depends on the two big things like the draft capital and the situation, who's going to wind up picking him up at this point. Because I think from that standpoint, we've talked ourselves into some of these guys in the past. And not to say that Dulcich could wind up being them. I'm just saying that guys with decent draft capital that have been drafted into good situations, we have not fallen all over ourselves thinking that, oh yeah, let's go ahead and get this guy because we should see the returns fairly easy, like fairly quickly, because they're going to get us like that return on investment, and we should be able to see production from them in their rookie season or shortly thereafter. Like remember Jordan Akins, like how long it's been since we've been waiting for him to become something.
Look,
I
now we've
mean,
got Brevin Jordan, same team all over again.
bingo, or Jay Sternberger, even though we were just talking about earlier. I mean, the fact that, I mean, Green Bay was, didn't they wind up, were you saying that they wound up using one of their 30-30 visits like on a tight
Yep.
end? Yeah,
Yes, on Greg Dulcich, they
that
used a top 30 visit on Greg Dulcich. Now,
bingo.
those visits don't always have to mean that the player is believed to be a top 30 prospect.
But
They
the
use him
interests.
strategically because they think that he might be somewhere around one of their picks.
Mhm.
However, you still had to use one of your visits on the guy.
Exactly. Or even what Dalton Keene, Josiah DeGuara. I mean, those third-ish, fourth roundish guys that it's just if you can squint and see the possible opportunity within their offense just based off of their target competition within their own position. So let's say if Dulcich goes to Green Bay, we know one, we know they need pass catchers. Two, they have a good, great quarterback. And then three, he's going to be competing with who? Like DeGuara, Robert Tunyon, who's
So
injured
no
at the
one.
moment. So you can see where the possibility for dynasty managers to wind up overdrafting him or now double counting it because of that situation where nothing is secure, like nothing is set in stone at this point. So I think trying to look into, or at least again, like setting those expectations based off of that draft capital can kind of give you a better sense of what we can really expect. And unless something drastically changed about the situation, I mean, we should kind of keep that in check as we kind of learn more through the draft process.
all about setting those expectations. I mean, when you're thinking about how much time you're going to spend on certain prospects, certain positions, how far into the draft are you going to go? Are you going to grade prospects out into the fourth, fifth round? What you're looking at from if you're just a listener and you want to use, Football Guys rankings, etc. I mean, I ranked 7 tight ends in my Football Guys rankings that I'm working on and publishing. And even that's too, I mean, how often is the 7th tight end going to make it onto any of my rosters? He's probably not, because I don't use
Yeah.
those later picks. I'd rather use those later picks on running backs who I see land in a situation where I can squint and see they get opportunity some way, somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Not tight ends who just, it's already hard enough to get production from a tight end. And then you need them to get opportunity and then produce with the opportunity. And it's almost impossible for them to get opportunity. So it's a very difficult position, and there are edges to be found. I mean, you can find that 1% chance, but it's just about how much time do you really want to spend on it. So I didn't want to go through just straight up my top 5 tight ends today. I wanted to kind of cover 3 different archetypes. Like, for instance, Trey McBride's probably the only one that you would even consider drafting in best ball right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's not even another rookie tight end that you could even consider in redrafts. So there's nobody that you're kind of falling all over yourself for to have early production that's going to cause you to have like FOMO because you didn't do enough research. There isn't anybody. But if I'm going to take a shot on tight end in like the 4th round of my Superflex rookie drafts, and I'm looking at my draft board and just saying there's nobody where I can squint and see early opportunity, which means there's not going to be a value spike early where I get FOMO. So let's dig into the tight end. Well, I'm going to look for a player who I think can make splash plays early on in their career. The type of player that's going to add a lot in the receiving game, and I don't really care about the blocking because we talked about it earlier in the show. Blocking can be good, but that's not what's going to result in fantasy relevance. So someone like Isaiah Likely is perfect for that, in my opinion. If you
Mm-hmm.
just can't see anyone you're excited about on your draft board, because he's the type of player you cannot ask him to block, period. He's too small. He didn't demonstrate the ability to block at a high level. He didn't even show that he was super willing to. However, fantastic receiver, like 20 yards per reception or something like that. So he definitely has the ability to make those splash plays that teams can see and say, wow, I can look at this player, see what he can do, and really like mold this player into our offense. And if you can do that early on, then maybe you can cement yourself. And I mean, Brevin Jordan made a few plays last year
Mm-hmm.
that maybe he could end up being one of those 1% outliers. He's a player that technically has a tiny bit of dynasty value right now that was drafted in the later rounds. So if he can develop with Davis Mills, it is possible, but you have to look for those guys that can kind of make that early impact, because the NFL is just ready and willing to cycle through these tight ends. I mean, you mentioned Asi and the other tight end. I can't even remember.
Dalton
Um,
Keene.
Dalton Keene for the Patriots last year. I mean, they took 2 shots on tight ends, both in the 3rd round, significant draft capital. And then what happened the next year? They broke the bank on Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, and now those guys are riding the bench, or I don't even know if they've been released, to be honest with you. But
Couldn't tell you.
certainly not on any dynasty rosters. So unless you have anything else on tight end.
No, I mean, again, it really just is about, can you set those expectations based on draft capital? Are you taking a guy that's more in the, I mean, we don't have a Pitts or Evan Ingram or like
Right.
TJ Hawkinson. No, we don't have one of those guys. So it's really comes down to, are you getting the next Freiermuth, Goddard, Dawson Knox like type of player, guys that might hit or take slightly a bit longer to develop just based off of their opportunity and could ascend into the top 12 ranks? Or are you just hoping one of those guys
Sure.
wind up hitting later on in their career, maybe 2 to 3 years down the road, like a Dalton Schultz? I mean, that's probably your best bet, because he's one of the only tight ends in the past 5 years with other than like outside of day 2 pick that's ascended into the top 12 ranks. I mean, you don't want to flash in the pan like a Chris Herndon. I mean, or like Ian Thomas or any one of those guys.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want fool's gold. So I think we've been saying this over the past few shows. I mean, sticking to your eval process and understanding and weighing more about the talent of the player versus the situation can wind up leading you in the right direction anyway.
Sure. So we've got a hard pivot here because if anybody hasn't listened in before, first, welcome. Please like, subscribe, rate, review. Secondly, we come from the Football Guys newsletter that you will get in your email if you subscribe to the email listing. That comes from Joe Bryant, Cecil Lammy, Sigmund Bloom, all contribute to that. Go straight into your email. And then what we do is we read that email and we pluck anything from it that's relevant to Dynasty that we can talk that's actionable about right now. So in the last Dynasty or in the last newsletter email list, um, Joe promoted Ben Cummins' recent article that talked about all the different changing landscapes for the quarterback position this year. And there have been a lot, and a lot I didn't even consider because some of them didn't have anything to do with quarterback. I mean, um, Christian Kirk leaving the Cardinals, I didn't really consider that to be a Kyler Murray thing. But then you look back at what he's going to have on offense and you see how DeAndre Hopkins hasn't been super available. And then you think for a
Mhm.
second, oh, I guess that does kind of matter for Kyler Murray, right? So we're going to take four of those quarterbacks that he wrote about in his article and just talk about their new landing spots or their new surrounding cast and how that should affect their dynasty value. So we'll start with the big one. We spoke about this when it first happened. I believe this was our first show back. Russell Wilson was traded from the Seahawks to the Broncos. In my opinion, this is a net positive. The surrounding cast is about the same, probably a little better because he's at least got some productive running backs to give him a hand there.
Mhm.
But he'll probably pass the ball a decent bit more with Nathaniel Hackett at the helm. So I'm thinking of this as a net positive for both his his dynasty value, which was descending for quite some time, to no fault of his own really either. I mean, the injury, Pete Carroll's willingness to let him cook for half a year and then go back to feeding Chris Carson, etc. I believe this is a net positive and a boost in his dynasty value.
Yeah, because now it gives the second act to his career the juice that it needs in order for him to retain his value from a dynasty standpoint. And I do think that this is more like the Nathaniel Hackett Russell Wilson marriage is more of a stylistic fit than what he was expected to do with Pete Carroll. And it's not necessarily about volume. I know that the whole like let Russ cook thing was at least one of the things that we as fantasy in the fantasy community like we wanted to all hop on and see more of the deep passes. But at the very least, that's really all we want because Russell Wilson on throws of 20 or 15 to 20 plus yards, he has been one of the most accurate quarterbacks for multiple seasons. And actually just even not on deep ball passes, but just in passes overall from a completion percentage over expected perspective. He has been top five. He was top five in like five consecutive seasons up until just this past year when he had to miss time with the finger issue. So, but with what Nathaniel Hackett was doing in Green Bay, we saw how well Aaron Rodgers was able to flourish. They weren't the fastest paced offense. They were one of the slowest in the league, 30, 31st, and 32nd in pace of play. But their deep ball rate, top 10. Neutral passing rate, top 10. It allowed Aaron Rodgers to operate at the pace that he wanted to, with the plays that he wanted to. And he was continuing to take deep shots down the field, whether it was to Devontae Adams on intermediate to deep crossers or even MVS when he was healthy. So now I think Russell Wilson is able to work in that area that he wants to without really having to force the volume or do it himself. He now can play the way that he wants to. And with Cortland Sutton capable of doing that, Jerry Jeudy capable of doing that, KJ Hamler when he's healthy capable of doing that. I think it's the fit I think that he's been looking for the entire time, not just from a skill position standpoint, but from an offensive philosophy standpoint. So I really am excited to see what they have cooking for him, like in Denver.
The things that stick in your mind that Aaron Rodgers and Nathaniel Hackett did really well together are also things that Russell Wilson is going to do really well, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the play action moon balls. The
Yeah.
things that Nathaniel Hackett and Aaron Rodgers did really well that don't stick in people's minds are the quick game. How often did that ball get to Devontae Adams in under a second, under 2 seconds?
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. Alan Lazard was a big screen guy as well. Quick passes to the tight end when Aaron Rodgers recognized that. And that doesn't mean that Russ does not have the ability to recognize things like that and dissect a defense in the ways that Aaron Rodgers did. It's just that he realizes that he could hit that tight end for that quick 6 yards, and he is unwilling to do so. So
Right.
that Nathaniel Hackett marriage may be a little bit interesting, but they are going to be very successful in the play action deep ball game. And as you were talking, I was thinking through is the receiving core really an upgrade? Well, there's no DK Metcalf for the Broncos, but you're talking four deep at wide receiver that are starting caliber wide receivers, all the way down to KJ Hamler, in my opinion. So
Right.
you've got Jerry Jeudy, who the book is yet to be written on him. Cortland Sutton, technically the book's been yet to be written on him as well, because he was looking like a breakout star in the couple games that he got to play before tearing the ACL. So Cortland Sutton has shown flashes, and he could definitely still be a true wide receiver one in the league. So we're talking, and Tim Patrick under contract, got the contract before Cortland Sutton, as a matter of fact. So they actually kind of prioritized getting Tim Patrick under contract at the risk of losing Cortland Sutton. So we're talking about probably a much improved receiving core, and his value seems to be kind of capped just based on the age, based on the, I guess, stink around his name that the term I've always used. He still seems to have a little bit of that stink, which is great, because you could still trade for Russell Wilson, and he's sitting at like the QB9, the QB10 in Superflex. So he's still super affordable. He's still in startups going to go behind some of those position players in those runs. Like you'll get a run all the way from like your Patrick Mahomes, your Josh Allen, all the way down to like Joe Burrow. And
Mhm.
then you'll see some position players go off the board, and then you can get Russell Wilson. So you can even trade back from one of those quarterback spots in the top 7 or 8, knowing that you want Russell Wilson, still get him and acquire some value. And look, over the next 4 or 5 years, you might be getting the same production as maybe your Joe Burrow is a good example. Trevor Lawrence is another good example. I mean, I hope Trevor Lawrence turns it around and gets into that conversation. But right now, I give me Russell Wilson, and let's let Russell Wilson cook. As opposed to the upside in some of these other players. Even Trey Lance is probably going to get ahead of Russell Wilson in a lot of drafts. So we haven't even seen him get on the field. And
Mhm.
while that's usually a silly argument, and I fully understand that, he's got to beat out Jimmy Garoppolo, and Jimmy Garoppolo didn't get traded to another team. So Kyle Shanahan kind of said, it would be nice if Trey Lance was a starter, but we're not just going to give Jimmy Garoppolo away. And that makes sense. But now Trey Lance has to go beat out Jimmy Garoppolo. And it's like, I hope he does. I think he should. He probably will. But you never know. I mean, if he doesn't beat out Jimmy Garoppolo, I'm going to be pretty sad if I'm the guy that took Trey Lance ahead of Russell Wilson. So that's going to bring us into the next trade, which was Matt Ryan going to the Colts. Colts, pretty complete roster. All they needed was a quarterback that wasn't Carson Wentz, apparently, for the last 2 games last year to get into the playoffs. Basically, anybody could have played quarterback and got them into the playoffs with the 2 teams that they needed to beat. However, that was not what happened. They got Carson Wentz out of there. Carson Wentz went to the Commanders. We're not even going to waste our time with that trade or that organization, but we will talk about Matt Ryan. How do you think that does for his dynasty value going forward?
Yeah, it gives him just a couple more seasons as a, let's say, low to like mid to low quarterback 2, which essentially should be in dynasty circles. It should be more or less a placeholder for a guy that you're looking to draft maybe in the next like couple of either next season or the season afterwards. That's essentially how I try and look at quarterback 2s, those aging guys, the Ben Roethlisberger of the world, the Phillip Rivers of the world, like beforehand. But Matt Ryan's been playing some of the not best ball of his career, but at least good enough for fantasy purposes. If I'm remembering correctly, he had like 5 300+ yard with multi TD games like last season, and that's with Kyle Pitts and Russell Gage as the primary wide receivers, and then
Right.
of course Cordero Patterson having his breakout season at age like 28 or
30,
yeah, I
30
think
or
he's
something
30.
like that.
Right. So, I mean, if that's the type of weaponry that he had around him and he was still able to put up like decent numbers, like pop up, like he would have those pop up weeks, right? Just because the offense was so volatile, like with Arthur Smith. But now he gets one of the best offensive lines like in the league. good running back or a good running back core. Also, the wide receivers. I mean, we like Michael Pittman. I mean, the jury's still out, or not jury's still out, but it's yet to be known if T.Y. Hilton's going to come back this year. I mean, but still, the pass catcher core is decent enough for him to continue. And also in that division now, getting to play against what, Houston twice a year, Jacksonville, even though we'll see what they do with their first overall pick if they wind up getting Aiden Hutchinson or whomever. I mean, their defense is still something that left to be desired as well. So, I mean, he could walk right into 8, 9 to 10 wins this year, because we saw Phillip Rivers do it in his final season. Carson Wentz was just a couple of games away from taking them to the playoffs. So Matt Ryan in the same situation, I would expect him to be able to do better. And I think he has shown he can over the past few years.
I know that Matt Ryan had at least one good game because I took first in a FanDuel tournament when he played against the Jaguars in London this past season. So definitely had one good game for me. I agree with Matt Ryan getting into a better situation, but I guess the only thing that we disagree on is that Matt Ryan, in my opinion, could be playing 4, 5 more years. It's just that he's playing decent enough football. He's not like playing Ben Roethlisberger football, or it's like he's got one foot out. Even Phillip Rivers looked like he had one foot out the door when he dragged the Colts to the playoffs just a couple years ago.
Mhm.
Matt Ryan's still playing pretty decent football right now, and I think he was a highly desired player on the market, but it got done quick, and it did make a lot of sense for the Colts because they're really built to try to make things happen now. We're revisiting points that were made when the trade happened on our first episode, but one of the points that I made at the time was that the Colts were not too much worse of a roster than the Bengals at the start of the playoffs last year. So if the Colts had Matt Ryan on their team last year, they could have potentially had a 1 or 2 game run into the playoffs. As a matter of fact, they were much better than the Raiders, so they probably should have been at least playing in the first round.
Sure.
But the Raiders, without a head coach, were one of the teams that they could not beat to get into the playoffs. So that tells you how badly they needed to have not Carson Wentz at the helm.
Mhm.
But that's going to do it for the 2 quarterbacks that we had traded. Now we're going to talk about 2 quarterbacks that had someone traded to them. 2 very, very different situations, but I've got a little connection for both of them that I want people to be wary of. So the first one we'll talk about is Tua receiving Tyreek Hill to go with Jalen Waddle, to go with Mike Gesicki. They also brought in Chase Edmonds. They also brought in a fullback. They also brought Raheem Mostert. So they're stacking players, stacking speed specifically
Mhm.
around Tua. Do you think that that should improve his dynasty value right now?
Yes. If the team is showing commitment to building around that player, then we as dynasty managers should take note of that. I mean, we ding quarterbacks and we ding players all the time for, I mean, things go in the opposite direction. So shouldn't we, if things turn positive, shouldn't we also now like up the value of that player? At least I would think so.
To your
Now,
point, Patrick Mahomes is kind of getting dinged now. He's not the consensus quote unquote QB1 because he lost
yep.
Tyreek Hill. So that's a valid point.
You got Josh Allen and Justin Herbert like waiting the wings to take that number 1 spot, and their offenses look much better. So it would obviously make sense that for Tua, if the team is investing in this speed and investing in these players that we know and love, then sure. I mean, I would boost his stock absolutely. Now the question is, and the thing that I'm still trying to reconcile in my mind is, yeah, you bring in the speed, you bring in this explosiveness, and in Tyreek Hill, and of course you still got Waddle, Gesicki. I mean, insert name here, and of course Chase Edmonds out of the backfield. But what is that run pass split going to look like? I mean, Mike McDaniels, he comes from, I mean, that Shanahan 49ers offense that has been like bottom 5 in terms of pass rate over expectation for the past few seasons. Now, does that necessarily mean that Tua is going to be, I guess, useless to us for fantasy purposes? No. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo has had a number of games where he's wound up in the like top 3, like in that particular week. And we talked about him for stretches of time over just this past season, where he would be the number 1 streaming quarterback, top 12 option, so on and so forth. So it's entirely possible that Tua can continue to be efficient as a quarterback, and that's essentially what we've wanted him to be this entire time. It's just trying to figure out what the passing volume is going to look like on a week in, week out basis. I mean, I don't think he'll be top 12, but fairly close to it. I think it's definitely possible now with, I guess, a strong offensive cast surrounding him.
So he's around like QB 15 in Dynasty ADP right now.
That's
And
fine.
I
Yeah.
guess I've got a couple strong takes on this one. So my first one is that I was already willing to acquire Tua to start this offseason. I thought that he was a decent buy. I think that McDaniel is going to be creative enough to use Tua in ways that we haven't even seen him use Tua there. I mean, if you imagine Kyle Shanahan's offense, Tua is who he would like to have. He just has to have Jimmy Garoppolo. That's why they drafted Trey Lance. And to be honest, Tua coming in, if it weren't for the hip injury, could have been looked at a little bit more like a Trey Lance. I mean, Tua wasn't going to run anybody over, but Tua
Hmm.
certainly had wheels. And maybe breaking your hip takes that out of the realm of possibility. But also playing with non-creative offenses could take that out of your realm of possibility as well. So it could still be there, and we don't know. So that's one of the reasons I was willing to invest into it. On the
Okay.
flip side of that, bringing Tyreek Hill in, to me, I can't pay the added value that is associated with Tua because Tyreek Hill came in. One, Tyreek Hill is 28. I believe he's going to be playing this season at 29. Secondly, the type of players that brought in could work for absolutely anybody. So, it's not like bringing in the fastest player in the league specifically caters to Tua's traits. Drafting Jalen Waddle, the fastest receiver in the draft, doesn't specifically cater to his traits. Edmonds very fast, Mostert very fast. Although Mostert doesn't matter really, he's probably going to be one of his last year or two. But the point of this is the offense is set up for Tua or whoever replaces Tua next year. It's not necessarily that these players were brought in for Tua to excel. I'd actually argue that Devontae Parker was the best option for Tua, not the most talented, of course. He was the third or fourth most talented. However, I believe that he was the best to play to his strengths, and he went to play for the Patriots. And then guess what? Cedric Wilson came in
Hmm.
very, very fast. So you have some of the fastest wide receivers in the NFL. And I believe that they hope it works out for Tua, but I can't pay extra on top of what I was already trying to acquire him for as like a quote unquote sleeper before all of these acquisitions happened, because now you're just double counting. Before it was like, I think there's potential with Tua. I will pay the QB 19 price, I think it was. And now to
Ish, yeah.
pay 14 or 15, it's like you can't I'm not I'm not going to pay a premium for him being in the news, a premium because he got Tyreek Hill, a premium for all these acquisitions. No, I think I would still pay for the QB 19 price. I don't think that I'm in on the QB 14 price.
But you can't
And
knock,
even
but you can't knock dynasty managers for because that's what we're supposed to do at this point, though, right? I mean,
well,
if
at
we think
this
there's
point, I
a
would have.
perceived if we think there's a perceived bump in value, and especially if we're thinking even long term, what's the chances of Tua even out kicking that? So let's say if we
Right,
think he's
that's
a
the
QB
problem.
19 and he's being valued at the QB 15, what's even the chance of him out kicking that and winding up at the QB 12?
Not
Minuscule shot.
not much.
It's I mean it'd be a tough sell. It's not impossible, but we say that's his absolute ceiling. But either way, I do think that the time to sell would be now, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where you come full circle. I mean, at QB 19, I was pretty good with it, but even when he's ranked at QB 15, every ranking is not the same. The difference between the 30th best quarterback and the 31st is not the same as the difference between the 14th best quarterback and the 11th best quarterback, because if you put names to these rankings, I mean, is he going to pass Trevor Lawrence? No. In their
Mhm.
careers, he's probably never going to pass Trevor Lawrence. He's not going to pass Joe Burrow. He's probably never going to pass Russell Wilson before one of them is irrelevant. So it's going to be really hard for him to push up into, and even if you do think that he's going to pass Russell Wilson in the next few years, Russell Wilson's already at the back end of the top 12. So he's
Yeah.
going to have to pass other guys before that. He's going to pass Trey Lance. And then you've got guys coming in. I mean, we're not worried about anyone in this class, but next year you might get three guys coming in that are going to be top 14. And then Tua takes a back seat for doing nothing. Tua could have a productive season this year and still end up back at QB 19 from QB 14 just because of the incoming draft class.
Yeah.
And that's insanity to try to invest in him now. You should feel good about yourself if you invested in him at QB 19. And, you should probably try to maybe sell and make a quick, I guess, profit would be the best term.
Yeah.
Quick turnaround would be nice on to investment.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about the Trevor Lawrence thing because it's entirely possible that Trevor Lawrence could do nothing, or Tua could do nothing and wind up ahead of Trevor Lawrence just based off of what the Jags have done around him.
If Trevor Lawrence could get if he has another season of doing absolutely terrible and then they have two head coaches at the helm without him being productive, maybe I could see that. The only problem is that everybody knows coming into the NFL, Trevor Lawrence's draft capital, and now you've got another head coach that we don't necessarily believe is incredible, and Doug Peterson. So a lot of people think that was Frank Reich's Super Bowl, and I believe Frank Reich has been a very good coach. I don't know that I've seen enough to say that Doug Peterson has been a very good coach. Although I have liked Doug Peterson enough to where, like, at least if you can get somebody to come in and just bring a normal locker room, like you don't need Mike Vrabel, you don't need Dan Campbell charisma. Just bring in a normal everyday locker room that isn't crazy, where no one's kicking kickers, and see if Trevor Lawrence can be one of the best quarterbacks in the league. But I think the name attached to Trevor Lawrence is going to kind of incubate his value for at least the foreseeable future. I don't think he's going to get immediately passed up by any of the 2023 quarterbacks, but I do think that Tua is right in the crosshairs of being one of those players where you go to do your rankings and you have to insert the rookies and you got to push guys back. I've been doing that right now. It's like, who am I comfortable pushing back because I have to slide him in somewhere, and he's just going to be the first name. We'll just put him right in front of Tua.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know, because if Christian Kirk is your wide receiver one, I don't know. Things might not work out for you.
Yeah, we'll see. That is fair. That could, I mean, but hey, they still have Visca Chenault, so you never know.
Yep.
And we're gonna get to our last player. That's gonna be Derek Carr. So he was on the receiving end of getting Devontae Adams. So he's got looking at Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, and Darren Waller as his primary targets, with Josh Jacobs getting more involved in the passing game as well. And then this is another situation where I can't really attest to his dynasty value increasing much. He's not under contract for the long term. I believe that they're working on something for that.
Mm-hmm.
But he is a little bit old and a little bit long in the tooth, right? So his dynasty value hasn't gone too crazy. His best ball value has gotten up to like QB 15 with bringing Devontae Adams over. And that just seems a little bit too early for me. So what do you think about Derek Carr in dynasty?
So what? He's 31, 32, somewhere in there.
30.
So
Yeah, I think he'll be playing at 32 this year.
yeah, and if I'm remembering correctly, there was speculation that with all the QB movement, he would also be kind of in this cycle of guys that could possibly move. It was going to be him, Rodgers, Russ, maybe Kirk Cousins, and then when everything came to light, essentially hit like he's winding up staying in Vegas. But overall, he's fine. It's funny, him and the running back on his same team, like Josh Jacobs, like those guys at their respective positions, like in Dynasty, they're fine. Like I don't think neither are elite, but if you're looking for production at the position, they're fine. Like that's essentially what both of them are. And Carr, I
Right.
think, and now because even last year when it was just essentially him and Renfro, or him, Renfro, and Waller with whomever as the third piece to that, whether it was Zay Jones, Brian Edwards, or insert name here, Deshaun Jackson for a play or two. It like he was actually showing like why he could at least be kind of like on the Matt Ryan spectrum of being a productive quarterback
That's
too,
fair.
a guy that could like essentially like win you your week if you needed him to. But overall, if you're looking for 18 to 20 points, Derek Carr is your guy. I don't think this move does much for me unless we're expecting Josh McDaniels to come in and essentially, I don't know, juice this offense and try and get the most out of it. Because if I'm from a narrative perspective, I can totally see him and Carr and Adams look at their division and say, hey, we ain't getting out of this division unless we go into each matchup, each interdivisional matchup like dogs, and we're just gonna shoot it out. and we're going to try and beat Patrick Mahomes, and we're going to beat the Chiefs as much as we can, even though they have taken it to the Chiefs each game over the past couple of seasons.
Yep.
Actually, Derek Carr has been top 6 QB in his last 3 of his last 4 matchups against Kansas City, if I'm remembering correctly. Or the same thing with Herbert and the Chargers. Like, we're just going to go in and we're going to just throw the hell out of the ball, get as much out of this offense as we possibly can, and then that's how we're going to run this offense. And instead of trying to play this conservative mode that Gruden or Bisaccia did over the past few years, and Bisaccia like in relief of Gruden, like this is the time that they're going to actually now bring this entire offense to life and bring this passing offense to life. I mean, I can see that from a narrative standpoint. History will tell you something different, but I can see that if you've got Devontae Adams, Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow, Bryan Edwards, Josh Jacobs, who is not the best pass catcher, but he can, pass catch. And then also the running backs that are behind them that are also decent pass catchers out of the backfield. So it's just this offense is now positioned to do it. And Josh McDaniels, especially last year when he was still with New England, we saw how he was able to adjust to the skill of his quarterback with Mac Jones, especially to the point where they only had Mac Jones throw 3 times in a game. You can see how he can adjust to what's in front of him. So again, all narrative based. And so if I can squint and see that as a possibility, okay, fine. But it doesn't change my evaluation or like my value for Derek Carr because of what you stated earlier about the long-term conditions for his contract and what he's going to be doing. And also for how much longer are we really expecting Davante Adams to be the Davante Adams he was in Green Bay?
I think if we're trying to make some value on anybody, I guess you could flip this and look at Derek Carr as somebody who you could invest in now early, because I guess in the Tua conversation, the way this is kind of tied together is that the Tua conversation was before all of these free agency moves were made, we had McDaniel basically saying, having that viral conversation with Tua on the plane, and you're the guy, and declared him the guy as soon as they got on the podium, etc. And so that's when you probably should have invested in Tua. And then they surrounded him. If you want to say that all of these acquisitions were for Tua and his future, then sure. You could do the same thing about Carr right now with McDaniels, where he's came in. I think that this, unless there's things going on in the background that we don't know in terms of the quarterback market, I think that this would have been a good time to move on from Derek Carr. You were a new coaching staff, but he came in and basically said, one, not only do we like you and want you to be a part of our future, two, part of the reason this staff is here is because we like you. Three, we acquired your best friend that happened to also be one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, if not the best wide receiver in the NFL, probably the best wide receiver in the NFL right now. So in that sense, maybe we're just trying to be early on Carr now, and you can go trade for a Carr as your QB2, and you might get 4 or 5 more years out of Derek Carr. You might get a big contract out of him. You might get the twilight of Davante Adams' career out of him, who Adams has said he wants to play for quite some time. So while Adams is getting close to 30, he certainly could be one of the outliers that gets to 35, 36. Although I would have said that about Julio, and that's appearing to be untrue. So I guess there's nothing to that. But you could be seeing a very good 2 to 3 years out of Derek Carr, and you could be getting him at a pretty easy price because, look, other people are waiting to see the contract or waiting to see how he works out with Davante Adams. If you maybe pounce on that now in Dynasty, you get your solid QB2 for the next few years. And what I like to do in Dynasty is, if I'm in a super flex, I usually roll with only 3 quarterbacks, which a lot of people don't do. People usually want more than that, but I'll roll with 3 usually, and I'll usually have one absolute top 7 stud. If you have to pay up for it, fine. But then I want one middle of the road kind of older guy, and then I want somebody who I'm quote unquote like in the incubation chamber, like that. A lot of teams I have Justin Fields on, where it's like I don't want to play Justin Fields, but I fully believe in his future. Derek Carr fits in perfectly in that role, where if you could have a Lamar Jackson, a Justin Fields, and a Derek Carr right now, you would be looking very good. And that is a quarterback room that is obtainable. It's not crazy. You don't have to draft perfect to get that quarterback room. You could actually go acquire that quarterback room, which is
Yeah.
crazy because in Superflex, you cannot go acquire a solid quarterback room. But if you kind of timed it right and you went out and maybe Justin Fields is a little bit expensive, but maybe you go over to like a Malik Willis to put in the incubator or something like that.
Mhm.
Somebody who might get to play a little bit early, fill in for that bye week, especially if you have those late buys. Now you're talking about, Derek Carr fits perfect for your team. You don't have to spend a lot to get him. So I think it might be a decent time to try to acquire Derek Carr. All right, so that's going to do it for us today. Please, if you're new, like, subscribe, rate, review. We appreciate all those things as we try to fight the YouTube overlords and their algorithms. But also, please subscribe to the email list because that's where you're going to see all of the news that we're going to cover here on the Dynasty Newsletter. But that's going to do it for us today. I'm Adam. He's Chris, and we'll catch you all next time.
Peace.